All right, so I love cruising. And when someone asks me, why? Why do you like cruising so much? The answer really isn't that difficult. It's just, there's a lot of reasons. But the main reason is we get to see so much of the world, not all of it, but so much of the world in a way that lets us unpack once. The transportation's part of it. You get fed as you're going to the new destination. We just love the value of cruising and how it enables us to taste and experience, albeit, at a surface level, recognizably, many, many different cultures. I also love a challenge. And when I was creating this channel, I really wanted to try to come up with a way to rate cruises in as objective way as possible. That's a challenge for sure. But that's the purpose of this channel, to continually improve, come up with, and work on a scoring methodology that helps you maybe pick the cruise that's best for you. Hey, welcome to This is the Cruise. I'm Clint, and this is the channel where we look at upcoming cruise itineraries and try to find out if this is the cruise for you. Except kind of for today. Today, we're actually going to talk about how I score and rate cruises. The reason for this is it's evolved since I originally set it up, and I'm kind of on my sort of third iteration of scoring. And I get this question asked most frequently: how do you do this? What is the score based on? What is the score out of? I see this number. How do I know if it's any good or not? Well, I'm going to try and address some of those questions in this video today. So we're going to jump right in here and we're going to get to it. But the obligatory, if you like the content, if you're enjoying it, you find it helpful, I really appreciate it if you like the video. It's even better if you subscribe. That really helps me out a lot. If I've helped you come up with an itinerary that really works for you, consider buying me a cup of coffee. There's a link here in the screen in the description below. It's a safe and secure way to say thanks. Just imagine that we went out for your favorite coffee and we talked cruises. That's kind of how I look at what I'm doing here. Another way you can support the channel is by joining the channel and becoming a member. For only $1 a month, you get access to, which side am I going to put it on? All of, wait, is it this side? All of these things, plus beta access to my application that I'm working on. It's coming along quite nicely, and you'll get some sneaks of that as we go through the video today. And you can also, of course, shop at my merch store and, get some cruising wear that you can wear out proudly, that you picked the cruise, that you got it, and this is the cruise for you. So consider hitting the shop up. It's here in my YouTube channel. I really appreciate it. Okay, let's jump in. So a real quick overview, just so we can kind of level set here. An itinerary is made up of a certain number of days, right? And you are cruising usually, almost always, to some type of destination. Sometimes these are called cruises to nowhere. The ship will leave the port and come back. We see this happen during hurricanes sometimes. All they can do is go out and avoid the storm, and they're never able to actually make it to their destination. It's not really what we're talking about here. We're talking about cruises that sail and have stops along the way. Those stops are the ports, and every port in my platform is rated on 10 different factors. And I have a rubric for all of these factors. So for each one of these categories I'm about to go through, it goes from 0, meaning it doesn't have this at all, to 5, it is basically perfect at this. And each rating is explicitly spelled out. So that way, as I'm rating these destinations, I can say it's a 3, it's a 5, it's a 4, it's a 0. That way, I'm taking out as much of the bias as possible. The main kind of category is the style. Is it an adventurous port? Is it an enriching port? And by enrichment, I mean, are you able to learn something either about nature or the culture or an experience that's more immersive? Or is it a relaxing port? Those are kind of the three main categories for what people look to experience from a destination. Can we get out there and do something fun? Can we get out there and learn something new? Or can we get out there and relax? And every port gets rated based on how many opportunities and how set up that port is for those three areas. Then we have the quality of the port itself. I look at things like natural beauty. I love cruising to a place that's stunningly beautiful, right? You have a place like Geiranger, Norway, which you cruise through Geiranger Fjord and you go by the Seven Sisters waterfalls, and it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's absolutely stunningly beautiful. Or St. Lucia. In the Caribbean islands, you have the Pitons, another UNESCO World Heritage Site, which is just gorgeous to visit, versus a place like the Bahamas, which are nice beaches, but not nearly as pretty as, say, a place like a St. Lucia is. Going back to Norway, though, you also have Oslo, which is a wonderful city. Well, it doesn't quite have the same natural beauty as Geiranger does, but it does have a city. And that's our next quality score. Is it a vibrant city with lots of things to experience in the city? We also look at locals. Does the local population accept and welcome particularly cruise tourists? Again, kind of thinking about a place like Norway. Norway likes tourists, but they would generally, many places, prefer those tourists to be spending more time in Norway on land and touring by land than they would have you come in by sea. Alaska can be the same way. Some of the Alaskan cities, like Juneau, they actually just recently voted against this, but the city put up for vote to limit cruising on Saturdays. They want the tourists, they're more accepting of tourists, but clearly there's a thread there where they're saying, hey, you know what, maybe a little less on the cruising side. Venice is another prime example where they're just overrun, right, with cruisers, and they said, whoa, time out. Barcelona, another one. So we've got great cities, but the locals may not be as accepting of cruising tourists as we would like, and that can have a negative effect on the quality score. Another one of the crowds. Speaking of Barcelona, I've been to Barcelona, spent a couple days there, and it was packed busy. Rome is another one, although you'd cruise into Civitavecchia, and but Rome is crazy where the crowds can really negatively impact your experience. Even coming back over into this hemisphere, the Bahamas. If you're going to Nassau, you could be in Nassau with five, six, or seven big ships. And yeah, there's going to be a lot of people in Nassau potentially while you're there. And that can also have a negative impact on your experience. But you may cruise to places that are so remote that they feel like that no one has ever been there before. It's like you have the whole place to yourself. And that positively affects the score. Another one is how safe it is, right? Is it safe? Is it clean? And that is obviously something that, regardless of the type of tour you're doing, whether it's on a cruise or on land, you want to go places that are safe. And so that also affects the score. So we have the three from the style, and then we have five from the quality, which leaves us two more. That's eight. So then we look at, what type of cruiser are you? And I kind of break these down into two categories, though I recognize that there could be a third. But for the two categories, is the port itself family friendly? Are there things for kids to do, things for families to do, where you have plenty of stuff? You don't have to really worry about the kids and if they're going to be entertained or not, or they're going to get something out of it. This kind of plays back to the adventure enrichment and relaxation. But kids and families require a little bit of a different experience than the next and final category for ports, which is couples or romantic. And so here we're looking at things where you can really get away as a couple and have a romantic experience. Just the two of you. You may have a guide, you may have other people there, but it's just a way to bring the two of you closer together. The third category would be solo cruisers and solo travelers. I have a really good friend who's a solo cruiser. He goes by himself and has a great time. And I don't think either of these scores really positively or negatively affect him. He gets a lot out of the other scoring. But I do recognize that solo travelers might need a slightly different scoring. If you think so, if you think I need to add that factor in, let me know in the comments below and let me know what makes a port great for a solo traveler. Okay, those are the 10 main factors that I have when I'm looking and rating individual ports that make up a complete itinerary. From there, I also look at the variety. Are we visiting different countries, maybe even different geographical regions? And I will put a little caveat in here. Let's say you're doing an Alaskan cruise and you're going from Seattle and you're going up to Alaska, even though Alaska and Seattle are the same country, or maybe you're going from Fort Lauderdale down to Puerto Rico, even though those are part of the United States, because they're geographically different, mathematically, I consider them as different countries. So we look at the variety, and this is the biggest reason why we cruise. Really, when we are picking out an itinerary, we want to be going to as many different places and different styles of places as possible. It's just something my family, really values. Then I'm also looking for stops that are unique. Is it a cruise that goes to Nassau, Bahamas all the time? Or are we maybe going to a Bahama destination that's less visited if we're going to the Bahamas? If we're in the Caribbean, are we going to like Grenada versus St. Thomas? Or, if we're going further south, are we going to St. Kitts or are we going to Grenada? Like, we've got some itineraries and some ports that are visited less frequently, and they influence the score positively because you have less opportunity to get to those places. So that in my mind bumps the itinerary score up. Then I look at the frequency of the itinerary, not unlike the number of unique stops, but how frequent does this itinerary or does this cruise go out? Is it a 3-day Bahama cruise that cruises the Bahamas year round? Right. And those are great cruises. It can be great cruises depending on the makeup of the itinerary, but you can do those essentially anytime. Is it a cruise that goes to Alaska 10 times in a season and then it's done for the season and then repeats that? Or are they doing something kind of a one-off that's unique? And we're actually going to see one of those later in this video that a friend sent to me, and I was like, this is really interesting. So that adds to the value for me as well. And it kind of gives it an exclusivity too. And you get to those places that maybe are more unique or that maybe are a little harder to get to. Then we can't ignore duration. My wife and I did a 3-day cruise this year. We had a great time. We also did an 8-day cruise this year. We had a great time. And we did a 14-day cruise this year and had a great time. They were all very different. They all brought something different to the table for us in a different experience. So I'm never going to sit here and go, oh, that cruise is too short. Maybe a 1-day cruise is too short, but that cruise is too short. You shouldn't consider that. Actually, though, I do prefer longer cruises, and they're not for everybody. And so we do get a little bit of a bonus to a cruise that's, say, 14 days over a cruise that's 7, over a cruise that's 3, keeping in mind that bonus is not much. It's just a little bit to say, hey, look, if this itinerary is the same, if we're cruising to the Bahamas and we can do it for 5 days or we could do it for 7 days, I'd rather go for 7 over 5. I do have a little bit of extra bonus there. And finally, and last but not least, is of course the ship. And because I've not been on every cruise ship that's out there, though, if you work for a cruise line and would like to get me on every cruise ship, I would gladly take you up on that offer. I use Cruise Critics editorial ratings for the score, just again to kind of take some of the bias out. If Cruise Critics says this ship is a 4 and or a 4.5, and my experience on it wasn't as good as I would have liked it to be, and I actually had that happen this year on a ship that was 4.5 according to Cruise Critic, and I thought, I wouldn't give it that. It doesn't matter. I don't change that rating. I keep that way so that I remove my own personal bias. Okay, so those are the factors. We have 10 factors per port, and those all get put together in the algorithm. And then we have 5 factors for the entire itinerary. Those all get put into the algorithm, which I'm not going to tell you what my algorithm is. That's the secret sauce. I worked on this with a professor of statistics out of New York University, NYU, and then a computer scientist who assisted me because I'm not a great mathematician in sort of finessing it so it all worked right. So when we're looking at a score, our perfect itinerary in theory should be 100. And if it's a 3-day cruise, it can score 100. If it's a 14 days cruise, it can score 100. The way the math ends up working is that some of these things become bonus points, which push the score up, and you can actually get a score above 100, which is great. But this says, okay, the maximized 3-day itinerary, the best it could possibly be, essentially is 100. And so I'm looking for 100 there. And a 14-day, I'm looking for 100. I don't say a 14 days worth 1,000 and a 3 days worth 300. So just keep that in mind because, and I'm going to stop here just for a second, because for some people, they can afford to do a world cruise on Seabourn or Regent on an ultra luxury cruise. And for them, it's nothing, right? They've got the money. Great. I hope you have a great time. I hope you have the best cruise ever. That's wonderful. We can't afford that. On the flip side, some people save their entire lives to go on a 3-day Bahama cruise, and they go out, they stop at Nassau, they have a great time on the cruise, and that's a once in a lifetime experience for them. And I don't think any of us should be so elitist that we take away from that experience. So I've been very, very careful with the math to take my bias out of it as much as possible, recognizing that a 3-day cruise going to Nassau, Bahamas, Nassau's not the safest port. It's not the prettiest port. There's a lot of fun things to do. There's a lot of adventure. There's some relaxation opportunities and even some enrichment opportunities in there as well. So you can still have a great time, but it might not be the same for you as going on a Southern Caribbean cruise where you have 7 days and you're doing a little bit more, but that costs more, right? And so if you have the money to do it, you've got the budget to do it. If you don't, you don't. And I don't think you should extend beyond your budget. Okay, so with that said, let's go ahead and look at some examples. Let's start with our Norway cruise itineraries here. So I've got my filter set to Norway. I'm picking 7 days. This is not a comprehensive list of all of the Norway itineraries. This is just what I put in kind of as an example to sort of make sure that things are looking right within the app here. So my top score is 81.37. And then I've got 7 itineraries in here, and my lowest score is actually 71.63. So what's going on here? Well, we've got a 7-day on the Rotterdam, and then that's 81, 80, 78 on the Rotterdam, and then 78 on Independence of the Seas. Now, if we look at these here, I'm going to open a couple of these up just so we can kind of take a look. This one here on the Rotterdam, that scores 81.37 points. It has a variety score of 2. So let's hop down here and look at the destination. So we're leaving from Rotterdam, which is our first country, and then we're cruising Norway, and then we're back home. So the reason this is such a great itinerary, though, is because we have all of these beautiful, beautiful scenic cruises through the fjords, and that factors into the score. And we're maximizing our time, and we have lots of opportunity for adventure and enrichment, which is really awesome. I love this itinerary. I absolutely would do this itinerary. In fact, we did a similar itinerary to this last year, but we did 2 Norway cruises back to back to make 14 days out of it. What about this one on Royal Caribbean? So what's interesting about this one is that they are only doing this itinerary one time, and then the ship is doing a bunch of other stuff here. It's a score of 78.3. It leaves from England, then goes up to Norway and comes back to England. It is maybe just a tick weaker in some of the scenic cruising, and honestly, I could tell you it's the Nordfjord fjord isn't quite as nice as Hardanger Fjord, which is what knocks the score down. However, you do cruise to Olden, which is really nice. Sometimes, like Holland America doesn't really cruise to Olden, they cruise to Nordfjordeid, which isn't as nice as Olden, even though you're on the same fjord. So I didn't get to go to Olden on our last cruise that we went on. This year when we happened to stop through Norway going to Iceland this year, I wish we had gone to Olden, to be honest. However, it can be more crowded, so it does have a little bit of take a little bit of a hit there in the crowd factor. So here we see that we've got a really interesting way to kind of look at these itineraries. Oh, but I should point out, why maybe does this one down here score lower? Well, let's take a look here and see. We've got a better variety score, which is really nice. That's interesting. How are we getting a higher variety score, but a lower score itself? Well, this is where the algorithm helps, because this is a Norway cruise, and I want to be spending as much time in the fjords. So it starts to look at all the scenic cruising that we do. It looks at the destinations. And in this case, Christiansand is a lovely stop. I actually really like Christiansand, but we're actually going to the Shetland Islands. We get Fjord. We only have one fjord looking at this itinerary. Now, we actually went over to Scotland this year, had 2 stops in Scotland on our 14-day. And it was a wonderful place to visit. It improved our variety score, but it took away from some of that beautiful scenic cruising that we would have gotten had we focused exclusively on Norway. Just kind of comes into play and affects the score that way. There's not many fjords here. We're really only cruising one fjord as we make our way in to Skjolden. We cruise Sonja Fjord, which is a really long, deep fjord and beautiful. It's not Geiranger Fjord though. So those things factor in. Let's pivot here and see what this looks like if we're doing something a little bit longer. Now, I should say, if you're looking at 7-day Alaska cruises, the scoring works the same way. Just different destinations, different scenic cruising focused on glaciers, for example. Let's say we had a couple 2 to 3 weeks. Let's say we had 2 to 3 weeks for a cruise. I don't want to just do the typical leave from Seattle, get 3 stops in Southeast Alaska, come maybe a glacier and come back. I would like something a little bit more immersive, because obviously we could do land tours with these and that type of thing. So I'm looking for anything between 10 days and 20, 22 days, somewhere in there, trying to figure out what may be the best option. And I got some really interesting scores. So we have our top score of 105. That's because of all the glaciers that we're going to be able to cruise. And then the next highest one is 98.58. That's a near perfect itinerary, all the way down to a 12-day Pacific Coast cruise. So let's take a look and see, because I think this is kind of interesting. This one that scores 105 points is on New Amsterdam, one of Holland America's mid-sized ships. It leaves from Vancouver, doesn't get a great variety score. We would expect that to happen in Alaska. We're basically only going to 2 countries here. We have a solid adventure with a very enriching itinerary. And then we have all of these stops with only 2 sea days. This is really, really interesting. Now, this itinerary technically could be booked as a one-way, leaving from Vancouver and going up to Whittier, or leaving from Whittier and coming back to Vancouver. So they're kind of combining these two itineraries together. And what happens here is we're repeating the stops. So we have 2 days in Skagway, 2 days in Juneau, and 2 days in Ketchikan. There are pros and cons to that. If you're like me, you want to go to new places, right? But the weather can be all over the place in Alaska. We were in Juneau and it was 80 degrees. Friends had gone the year before and it was like 50 degrees, similar season, just crazy. So it can be all over the place. If you're cruising a glacier, it may be cloudy or rainy and you don't really get to see much. So having the opportunity to come back on your, try it on the way up and then on the way back, it's a really interesting proposition. And it really does help the score because these are such solid stops. With an itinerary like this, we get Glacier Bay, Inside Passage. That's really nice on the first half. On the way back, we get College Fjord, Glacier Bay again. Glacier Bay, if you've never cruised to Alaska, that really needs to be like your number one thing. We got to hit Glacier Bay and then everything else. It significantly impacts the score here, and we're getting to do it twice. So if the weather is not great one time, it likely will be great the next time. I like that about this itinerary. What I don't like about this itinerary is that we're repeating those stops. However, Skagway, you want to take the train up into the mountains, you may only have one chance to do that. So you do that on one day and then you have the chance to do something else the next day or the next time you're through. That's a great opportunity to do the things that you really want to make sure you get to do. Looking at this 17-day Ultimate Alaska with Glacier Bay, this one happens to be on Princess. It's on the Grand Princess, an older ship, but bigger, gets a near perfect score at 98.58. And looking at the itinerary, we get to go to Ketchikan, Juneau, Skagway. We hit Icy Strait Point. That's another interesting stop. You can do some really enriching things there. Hubbard Glacier is great. Seward. Then we go to College Fjord to cruise there. Go back. You get to Sitka, Haines, Glacier Bay again. So you have 2 stops in Glacier Bay as you make your way back. So even looking at the map here, we just have so many more stops. I actually prefer this itinerary over the 14-day Holland America one. Now, there are some things in here that aren't the best, but it's nearly impossible to get a truly perfect score because think of a place like Oslo, a wonderful city in Norway, but It's not the prettiest destination. A place like Amsterdam, an incredible city to visit because it's so walkable and it's safe. They're trying to reduce the amount of cruisers that come through, but the surrounding environment for Amsterdam isn't really that pretty. So it doesn't get a perfect score. Looking at this itinerary, I really like it. It's 17 days. Next, we do start to drop, and then we hit like a 22-day itinerary on Princess that just goes to so many great places. It's really similar to the one we just looked at, but it leaves from San Francisco and it actually takes a hit because of the number of sea days. It is an interesting itinerary. And because it's unique, it's only repeated one time. I mean, do you really have the opportunity to go to Alaska that often from San Francisco? Not really. You have a couple stops in Canada, and then you've got the rest in Alaska. So you can kind of see we have some really interesting ones in here. Some of them that take a hit are because of the number of sea days. This one here actually leaves from Seattle, from Vancouver, and does kind of a fire and ice itinerary. This one is on the Norwegian Sun. So you go up, cruise up to Alaska, then you cruise out to Hawaii, and then you're back. That sounds interesting, but you are at sea a lot of days. You're actually at sea 6 days. It's 7 day, 7 ports and 6 sea days. Half the time is at sea. That's not great for someone like myself. I want as many ports as possible. All right, all that to say, that is how I score itineraries. That's how I put these together. I hope you found this helpful. And I will say, the biggest question I get, other than how do you do this, is why don't you talk about cost more? And I'm working on a cost factor and another way to kind of look at how these scores rate compared to what the itinerary costs. That's going to take some time to get worked out. There's two main issues with cost. One is the fluctuation in how much it costs to book a cruise. If you book it really, really early, you're going to kind of pay top price. If you wait, there's often a lull and you get around the holidays and it gets a little cheaper and then comes back up. And then as you get closer, if there's a lot of space available on the ship, the prices go down. So they try to put more people on the ship. Remember, they actually would rather have someone on the ship spending money than they would have an empty room from a revenue perspective for the cruise line. So, it goes down. But if the ship is really full, then the price starts going back up. If it looks like they're going to be running at full capacity, or if it's a high demand or high season, then it starts to go back up. And likewise, a lot of these itineraries are repeated multiple times. Say a Caribbean cruise will start in October and they'll stop cruising the Caribbean in March or April or so, somewhere around there, which means you're cruising over the holiday season. And I know from experience, we've done holiday cruises over New Year's and over Christmas, separate times, and those can be more expensive. We shop hard to make sure we're getting the best deal possible, but kids are off and families are traveling together, so they know they can charge more than, say, a cruise that's in early November when there are less people on vacation because they're waiting till Thanksgiving to go on vacation. So you'll have the same itinerary that's cruising throughout the year, throughout the season, and those prices will be different. So this makes it really challenging to figure out how to do this. I think I'm getting close. And you'll start to see it when it's ready, and then I might make another one of these videos. So anyway, I say all that to say thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this helpful. I want to know what you value when you're cruising. So leave a comment in the comments below. Let me know what you think. What are the things you value? Why do you cruise? And if you've never cruised before, tell me, like, what's preventing you? What's stopping you? And in the meantime, stay happy, stay healthy, stay cruising.